Cool. So, why don't we start it off a little bit differently? And one of us goes and kind of maybe says what we think of right off the bat when we think of time, or would you rather a question?
So like I've actually been like itching to say this to you for on this
Okay.
topic specifically.
All
So
right. Cool.
like
Let's hear it.
for me, I think like when you mentioned time, it was interesting because I heard something the other day and I kind of wanted to expand upon it and it really just made me start thinking. And it said that it is crazy that we still look at time the same. That to us there are 24 hours in a day. Like this dude was saying that the idea of that is ludicrous because we're measuring time the same way as the people who needed to handwrite a letter, give it to the mailman, who went and got on his horse and buggy, and you had to wait a week for it to get there if you were lucky, if it ever showed up at all, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking about a time when when you couldn't necessarily just pick up your telephone and go and talk to your mom who's halfway across the world, right? You had to actually go and make the time to see her. So like time to them was very different as far as the things that they had to do, right?
Yeah.
And it's just interesting because what he was saying was that, and I don't necessarily believe this part, but he was saying that his day, his entire day, his 24-hour day starts at 6 a.m. and ends at noon. 6 hours. That's his 24-hour day. And he's
You're
not
talking about
crazy
Tony
for look.
Robbins?
It might have been. It might have been.
Okay.
And he was saying
Please
that
go
like
on.
he's
Yeah.
not crazy because he's not crazy for thinking that way. That we're crazy for thinking it takes 24 hours to get a day's worth of work done. And I just thought it was an interesting concept, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It is because I think we decide a lot of what we're gonna do throughout the day based on the amount of time we have, right? Because if we think we have 24 hours, then we're gonna start off our day maybe fooling around a bit, and then we eat breakfast, and then we go do something else and work for a bit, and like, oh yeah, that was hard work. Now I get to go play because I still got 10 hours, so I'll do a little bit more work later on, but I'm gonna play for now. And then you get into this mindset of like 24 hours ends up being, I mean, you figure 8 for sleep or whatever, like however, give or take. And then you end up with a few hours of work because you figured you had a bunch of time. And that, I mean, that's procrastination and all that stuff. But I like that because then you realize, okay, I got 6 hours. So that means I can work for 5 hours, play for 30 minutes, and then I need to, and my next day starts. So I need to work again, right? Like,
And I just thought it was interesting because like I never thought about it as far as like all the differences that we've had, all the technological advancements, everything we've changed, right?
yeah,
From what we know about ancient times to now. There is so many differences because we as humans has grown, we've evolved, we've learned more, and we've applied that. So I just thought it was crazy that when I think about it and I try to think of anything that is the same exact from 200 BC to now, as an example. You know what I mean? And the only answer I get is time,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, time and like space.
So I think it was I just thought it was a super interesting idea as far as like I've never had the epiphany that like, maybe there's less than 24 hours in a day. Maybe there's more than 24 hours in a day. What
Yeah.
if it's just how you're spending your time?
Well, and it's interesting because exactly, yeah, right, right. Because like, what defines a day? So a day is decided by us. So what's the downside to not having a day, or how would a day not line up? Is like to keep track of the moon, right? The idea of new month because the moon is in a certain spot and we've rotated so much, and so that way we have an idea of when to expect what, and so it's keeping track uh, of a linear path. But that doesn't mean you can't have multiple days within the 24 hours or that period of whatever to keep yourself
Well,
on track.
like you said, it's a way to how'd you exactly just word that? Something path.
Like
I
a
like I
linear path.
Yeah, I really like the way that you word that as far as like time is just like it's the linear path, right? So that linear path for you could be entirely different than it is for me,
Right.
right? Because time for me and my linear path and the way that it relates to me and could be vastly different than the way time is related to you. And I think time is an interesting concept because like that saying time flies when you're having fun, right? Like if I'm hanging out with you and we're talking, hours can go by. It's like, holy shit, we've literally been sitting here talking for 3 hours.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's like, and then other times it's like, say you're sitting at the doctor's office and you're sitting there for 30 minutes, but it feels like 7 hours.
Yeah, it's like the perception of time is different depending on where you are or even when
And
you are.
what you're doing. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So I
Yeah.
feel like it's once you start trying to like dissect it, and it's like, okay, well, if time isn't as simple as 24 hours in a day, point A, point B type, linear, you know what I mean? And it is linear, but to a different degree, at what point is it not just another tool that you can try to mold and work to your benefit? You know what I mean?
Yeah, because like you could even like that guy had said with 6 hour days, like he could almost just put a different name on that. Like you still have days and that's 24 hours, but then you have micro whatever, microdas, you know what I mean? Micro days. And those can be 6 hour periods that make up his day, just as multiple days make up a month and multiple months make up a year. Like, why can't you have something more finite than a day? And yeah, you have hours and then you have minutes and you have seconds, and you could argue that is those things, but why not have another defined period in there? Like, we don't have any defined period for a 6 hour period. We have 6 hours, right?
Because even for instance, like a work day, like people, a common place when you say work day, people commonly think about 8 hours, eight
Right.
and a half hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But even then, that's not a universal everybody. Because like if I talk to my man Ty and I say, yo, after a work day, he thinks 12 hours. That's
Right.
his work day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's literally no universe, and I think that's actually an interesting point as far as like most people, at least in America, are I'll say middle class, right? That's what makes up the
That's fair.
majority
Yeah, we're
of
pretty wealthy as a country.
Americans.
Yeah.
We are arguably one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we are also arguably one of the countries with the most opportunity in the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And I think
and
middle
I,
class is like a in the world type thing. I think that's fair.
you know what I mean? So I feel like if you were to take, if you were to see, listen, I keep getting sidetracked because there's so many different avenues that I want to go down with this, and like I have one thought and it spirals into another, so then it
Yeah,
makes me want to go onto a tangent,
yeah,
and it's
do
like,
it.
well, hold on, bring it back for a second, and then it's like, now I forgot both.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
Nah,
I do. I
yeah,
just I feel like it's actually kind of absurd to me that there's no universal term for like a middle class working workday. You know what I
yeah,
mean? What's the universal term for that? Why is like 90% of people I know go out for an 8.5 hour workday? Nobody I know has something that they would call that universally that everybody would be like, oh yeah, you're talking about your 8.5 hour workday.
right, right. Even those terms are up for perception, and like
Right.
I think that's kind of a good thing in a sense. Like I don't think we should necessarily define a more specific than that, just because I mean, yeah, putting names to certain amounts, sure, but like allowing for it to be understood that it is up for perception. It's like the idea how when you're in space, you're generally speaking, you're going to age slower. And that's generally because you're traveling faster than someone on Earth or any other planet that has gravity. Because speed equals faster you go, slower you age, but only to you. Everyone else perceives it as you're going you're I believe you're going faster to them, like they do perceive it as faster if I remember correctly, but to you you perceive time going slower, and so you literally age slower. And it had made me
That kind of, so like that, you saying that like instantly makes me think of the Flash, right? Like when
yeah,
you see him when he's running super fast and like he's running through rain, for instance, the rain to him is standing still.
right,
You know what I mean? And that's one of those things I've always thought was interesting because like, not to try to like take it off topic, but like something that's always got to me about the Flash, what happens when you have like high water pressure, right? Like I can cut through steel if I have enough water pressure, right?
right,
So when you're running that fast, when you ran through, say, a rainstorm, Wouldn't that rain turn you into Swiss cheese?
Well, unless you are the water.
I mean, the Flash isn't water; he's the Flash.
Right, but the water pressure is speed, right? And so the water is the thing cutting. So wouldn't the Flash in a way be the thing that would cut as well and be able to like even run through buildings and stuff? Because his molecules are moving faster than the molecules of say steel. So he might be able to like just separate them.
Well, if that was the case, then wouldn't it stand to reason that he wouldn't take physical damage and he gets his ass whooped all the time?
Yeah, and I think it would. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not going to pretend I'm a physicist, but
Right. No,
yeah,
I'm not. Like I said, I don't want to spin off. It was just a weird
yeah,
thought that I had. And it was because, like, when I was in juvie, there was a guard, and he made it his life's mission. Like, he liked superheroes, but he loved fucking with people, and so like super strength. Yeah, your bones couldn't handle it. I don't care how strong you are. When you try to squeeze through a tank, your bones are gonna break. Doesn't
right.
matter if you physically are capable of doing it. Your bones and the structure of your bones could not handle that. And it's like, well, damn, why'd you got to ruin the super strength for me, dog?
Yeah, I mean, unless the bones were super strong too, but
Yeah, but back on time. Back on time.
yeah. So
Back
I
on
mean,
topic.
I think it is on topic in a sense, though. Really, like I think that very much applies the idea of slow motion and fast and like just a
And
perception
that's
of
what made me
that.
think of it. So
Yeah,
like, because like you said, so if he's moving so fast that like, right, those are standing still to him.
right.
So if in my reality, right, something moving that fast, it's like a steel plate moving that fast. The water is gonna go right through it. Swiss cheese.
Yeah,
But the steel plate won't observe those raindrops as being slower. There was actually this. I actually wanted to send you the link, and I'm going to because it was really weird. But there's this tribe of people that straight up it's and they walk on fire, right? I mean like red hot coals, like
yeah,
there is
yeah.
no way, you know what I mean? And so physicists went out there and actually did a study to try to figure out, you know, if it's a hoax, what's going on. And the physicists found that right before the person starting to walk on the fire, everybody in the vicinity, their heartbeat would sync together. To the point that one of the physicists actually ended up wanting to try it, and he was able to walk barefoot across the red hot coals. Like, I mean, scorching hot. Like, and I don't mean just like walking gingerly. I mean like someone on his back stomping through it, like just like it wasn't even there. Like it didn't even phase him. It was absolutely insane to watch. You know what I mean? And it's just something I like. Right, that's something I could cover a whole episode on because that
Yeah,
is cool as fuck.
I
And
love that
tell
kind
me
of
that
science.
doesn't challenge the way you think. You
And
know what I mean?
and
Like,
and that's the really cool thing about like what we're doing is like we can challenge the fundamentals of what we base our reality on and what we accept as truth and not truth, and then we can start to realize that things like that you said, we can start to realize like those things very well might be possible. How might they be possible? Well, and then you can go and you can elaborate on these ideas that we might kind of discount before because we would see them as false, or you know what I mean? Because
and to just kind of try to tie it back into time, it's crazy to think how little time needs to pass in order to change your perception, right? Like, because for
facts.
me, that physicist has been working in physics how long? So to me, they went out there in a I'm gonna disprove this type thing. You know what I mean? Like this isn't possible, and I'm gonna prove to you why.
Right.
And just think
Or
about how
yeah.
little amount of time, how little evidence he had to see in order to be like, holy shit, yeah, taking off his socks and shoes, like, you know what I mean? So it's,
Yeah.
and I think the same thing is very could be said on the flip side though. So like where he had a very enlightening experience, I think that's that kind of we can tie that back into like what we're saying like yesterday and shit about distractions, right? The time you spend on distractions. So if he spent that little bit amount of time with these people, had I'll call it a spiritual awakening, like a whole new outlook on things now, because yeah, I can only imagine actually experiencing that and how that would change my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and it would open up many more possibilities. I mean, even to go with time, like the idea of like understanding that the very same thing can impact someone else differently just because of the circumstances around them. Again, like the idea of it's I don't remember what the law is called or what the theory is, but it's an Einstein story where he gives a story of two twins, and he says so they're born at the same time or within like a minute apart type thing. One of them goes to space, orbits the Earth, and comes back, and he finds that his twin on Earth has aged faster. He's like 20, 30 years older than him, and he's like, why is that? And it's because of that idea. Like, even though the same amount of time passed for both of them, had like relatively right, like it was
Right.
relatively the same amount of time
Right.
for each individual, it is not the same together. And it's actually been shown to be the case even with like atomic clocks, which I believe are just like any like pendulum, like gear gear clocks and things like that. But I'm not sure what an atomic clock is. I had read this earlier. Um, but an atomic clock on an airplane, the time will pass, I believe it was slower than the time on just like my clock, that if I'm just sitting here, because when you move
Huh.
faster you experience slower time. And so it made me wonder, so if you're like, say I was a race car driver and I rode at 200 miles an hour for 8 hours a day for the majority of my life or for 20, 30 years, I wonder how, if one, that I would in fact be aged slower than if I hadn't, and by how much. Because wouldn't that be neat if like you could live longer by just always
Well
going
then,
faster?
well, well then, like that's an interesting concept because then it's like, all right, what's the key to immortality? Speed. You know what I
And
mean? It's like,
controlling
all right, so
time.
now all you got to do is figure out how you can get to a high enough speed that you age by seconds instead of days. And no, you won't live forever, but you'll live for damn near it. You just got to figure out how to maintain your speed and not crash into anything.
And that's the interesting thing. So time is the measurement of how long something takes to happen, more or less. I think that's a fair definition. There's probably more to it, but
I
and
can
so
Google it if you want me to.
sure, yeah. And so
I'm I'm not as scared.
the speed of light uh, is a measurement of time in a sense, I believe. But
The indefinite continued progress of existence and events in the past, present, and future regarded as a whole. A point of time as measured in hours and minutes past midnight or noon. Those are the nouns. Verb, plan, schedule, or arrange when something should happen or be done. And then the other verb, measure the time taken by a process or activity or a person doing it.
right, so it's the collection of events, past, present, future, and it's also the measurement of minutes, time, like minutes and stuff like that. So
Yes.
how long stuff has passed. Yeah, so like speed of light is a measurement of how long it takes, because speed is like what, something over time, distance over time, or something like that. And so if that's the case, then technically speaking, if you can figure out how to, like you were saying, go fast enough, if you can figure out to go as fast or faster than the speed of light, you are now outside of the time of, or the realm of time. And at which point it no longer has any impact on you. And so you would at that point effectively be immortal because no time would pass for you. That's weird, right? Like, it's super weird. And it made me
I'm just
wonder.
saying, by our second podcast, we figured out immortality. I'm just fucking like, if that isn't a fucking milestone, like, come on, man.
And so it made me wonder, like, you look at people in the modern age versus people when the time first began. People didn't have cars, they didn't have planes, didn't have spaceships. I mean, ideally maybe they did, there's conspiracies and stuff like that, but in general it's safe to assume in a skeptical manner that they didn't exist. And so then you look at now and you're like, I wondered, so if more people go faster more often, is that contributing to why we're living longer? do we live longer as a society because of it?
I mean,
Even if it's a
I
small
feel
amount,
like I feel like I wouldn't say because of it. Would it be
impact
like a
it.
part of the
Right.
equation? Absolutely. But
Yeah.
I would definitely argue that modern day does more as a whole.
It's believed that time and space are kind of hand in hand. They balance one another out, and that's the idea of if you travel
Space is
faster. And
fake. The moon landing is a hoax.
so
The
that's
Earth is flat.
the idea. If you travel faster in space, then we could definitely talk about that sometime. But uh, yeah, so like that's the idea. It balances out one another. But
Um, no, I've actually like with everything that's going on in the world. Like I was listening to an Echo song, and he says, "I just want enough money to buy a spaceship." And I've just been like really feeling that. Like, give me enough money, buy a spaceship. I'm out. I'm out. Me and all my loved ones, we out.
yeah,
We're gonna
it
go
would
live
be
forever in space, moving very fast, as I now know, because that's what I need to live forever is speed. And in space, like theoretically speaking, anyway, because clearly I've never been. Theoretically speaking, it'll be easier to move fast in space.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no gravity holding you back, so it's you use less fuel. Like in general, a spaceship will use more fuel. I think it's like far more fuel taking off than it does once it's like the entire trip around the Earth and everything. It uses more taking off than it does for that entire trip, and that's because gravity is holding you back. Like it's literally something pulling you, or that's the theory on it anyway. There's people that believe that gravity doesn't quite exist the same way that we think it does, but
I mean, all right, I could see that, I guess, and not like when you first said it, it made me kind of chuckle. Like, right, there's no
it's a theory.
gravity, but
Yeah.
it's like to me, it's like, is it easier for me to like? It's easier for me to believe that there is gravity because there's no gravity in space, but it's like I've never been to space and experienced no gravity.
Well, right. And like even if there is gravity in the sense that like what we call gravity is what we see as gravity, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is what we think gravity is. I don't know how, you know what I mean? Because it's
I'm
like,
gonna Google.
yeah, because
I
it's
want to
like
know what the.
without making this super religious, but it's the idea of a god, right? Like like the Christian God isn't the same as a Hindu God, but they're both God. It's just it's the title that's given to a entity that does what they perceive, what they see.
So, the force that attracts a body towards the center of the earth or toward any other physical body having mass.
Right.
Extreme or alarming importance, seriousness.
Yep. And so like keeping in mind that we we create the likelihood and maybe we should have discussed fact as one of the very first so we could reference that, but a lot of this is founded on the idea that we think it's true or we believe it's true because we believe it's true. That very few things have we proven with a definite absolute. Instead it's just the most likely because we haven't proved it wrong. And you know what I mean? And so what we
Right.
call, and even with time, like we give it the name time, and like there was an interesting thing I heard is that like we only have one name for time, and it's the idea that like we perceive it as what it is when we've given it this name, like we've given God a name type thing, but it makes up a lot more than what we understand, and it's time isn't something that we can really completely define. It's there's a lot of theories that time exists on a plane versus linearly. So like your past hasn't just happened. It wasn't reality and now it's not. It's just as much real as it was, and it all exists in the same space. And it's just this is where we are, even though we've been dead for a trillion years, and we haven't been born yet. It's just
See,
where we
and
are now.
See, and I like that idea because like when you take that as a concept, that's when I can start seeing like time travel and shit as an actual possibility.
Yeah,
Because if it's not just here and there, right? If it's not just a linear straight line, as in like, what happened, now it's gone forever. Like the words I just spoke, now it's never happening. It can never happen again. They're gone, right? It
Yeah,
happened. It's in the past. So if I think about it like that, it's really hard for me to think like, okay, it's possible for me to go back to that point. But if you think about it as a plane, like you were saying, and you were like, everything's always happening and not happening,
yeah,
because like where I'm, like I said, if you walk outside, right? You walked outside for you, but that doesn't mean anything for me. It's the same thing.
right.
It's a plane, right? That's happening over there. So if you just apply that to your life, in your own life path, and what you do with your life. So like, right. So for me, thinking about how I stole weed whackers when I was a teenager, I don't recommend that for anybody. Ended in a horrible experience out of me. 0 out of 10. Do not
0 out
recommend.
of 10.
uh, but it's like, so if I think about me back then and now, it's like my inherent is like, right, that's in the past. It's obviously not happening now.
Right.
But it's like I'm I'm not walking outside right now, but what if I
And
am?
it's interesting because like to in a way, more so or less so, your past is impacting you in your present and future if you allow it to, in a sense. So I guess in a way, if you argue that it is happening now, just as this is happening now, and it's just we're separate in a sense, it would make sense that it would impact you continuously, being that it is very much still happening, but only
Well,
if
and it's
you.
like, and it's kind of cool because, like, for me, if you're looking at it like that, right? It's like, so we'll just say, for instance, if you're trying to paint the picture, right? You could build a house for every instance that happened in your life,
Okay.
and not every house is going to be as good as the last one. Not every house is going to be as good as the next one. You know what I mean? Some of them
Yeah.
are gonna, but overall, those experiences, what you take from building each house, will make the next house a little more, a little more, a
Yeah.
little more. And it is up to you what that little more is. Are you going to make it positive and see improvements? Or are you going to be like, I hate this house, so the next time when you build one, you're going to leave out the stairs? Well, now you have a tall roof, but it's pretty one dimensional. You know what I mean? It's I don't know. I don't know how I'm trying, like, I'm trying to figure out how to tie it in together, because like it makes sense in my mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a very interesting analogy.
So, all right, if I were to, so for instance, stealing, like, we'll say that stealing weed whackers, once again, what was me building a house, right? And so overall, that was a shitty house. Bad idea, horrible, but there were things that I learned from it,
Right.
right?
And it
So
still
so maybe
exists
that,
in your neighborhood.
right. So maybe the house itself was shit, but you know what? I learned how to make a pretty cool staircase in there. I learned some things from that I will never do again. And now in every house from there on out, you will notice that same staircase in all my new houses,
And
because
see,
I learned that and I took it with me. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because, like, in a sense, tying it back or like elaborating on the idea of how that relates to time, it's like if all of that existed at the same time, all of those events existed at the same time, it, like you said, building houses, it's as if you're building a neighborhood, your own neighborhood of
Right.
houses, and you can walk to any one of those at any given time and pull from it what you've learned. Or if you're not careful when you walk into that house, you're going to, feel bad or whatever based on what's in the house that you did wrong. Like you might have put the window crooked and now you're beating yourself up about, a crooked window. So it's an interesting thing how, like, if you could access all of that at any given time without any sort of filter, because I wonder too if like our perception on time, the way that we're taught it and the way that we kind of force ourselves to believe it, if that also hinders our ability to kind of unfiltrated to just literally pull from any event at any time and look at the future in a different light. Because I think we look at the future and we base it on the past and present. But if we didn't understand time the way that we do, I wonder if maybe we would make like the future would be a lot more possible to us if it had no impact, or our past and present had no impact on that future. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I'm trying. I'm trying here.
Yeah, well, it's like, uh, I think the perception of time, going back to even what we were talking about, how like we might procrastinate because of it and things like that. If we perceived future as a definite thing without any impact of what we had done, then we may be more likely to believe in what we can do and in that future, because the past.
Okay, so like if we're gonna tie it into our time and our neighborhood analogy, because I really like this analogy, so I'm
I
gonna
like
keep
the
fucking
neighborhood too.
running with
Yeah,
it.
let's see it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like it's one of those things like if you were to completely take your idea of time and that and you were to throw it away. And you were to and by doing that, I won't say disregard your past, but there'll be a lot of things in life that if you take time completely out of it will be fundamentally different in my opinion, right? And it'll make you look at things fundamentally different, right?
Yeah.
So if to me, if you do that, and instead of looking at time in our linear path, like this is where I was, this is where I am now, and blah blah, you know what I mean? So if you look at it like our neighborhood, like we're saying, right? To me, because like I kind of, for me, I kind of live this way without ever like looking at it like this. So it's kind of cool to me. You know what I mean? But for me, right? Like I have no problem looking at the current neighborhood that I'm living in, right? And I'm like, okay, this is the neighborhood that I've built, but like I've seen what houses can be, right? I've seen what I can make my neighborhood become. So it's like every time I'm developing a piece of land now, every time I'm building a new house, I'm trying to build a house.
And you know what's interesting about that? Because it just kind of like popped in my head, like when you went with that. Exactly that is that. So, okay, so what if to a point like that neighborhood? Because again, if things have happened, is happening, and are going to happen, but everything exists at the same plane, then in a sense, the houses that you were building, you've already built, right? And so if that's the case, then that means you're able to at any point technically walk into a house that you've already built, the most perfect house that you'll ever build in your life. You've already built it, and now you're inside of it. And because you're inside of it, now you can learn from it. Now you can start taking like, that's how I built that house, that's how I built that kitchen. Wow, I did a really good job on those cabinets. Look at the way that I must have. And so then, for real though, because then it's like you're looking at your future, right? And then you're starting to see like, okay, so if my future is this, then that must have been what I did. I must have did this because now I'm there. And so
And
then you
it's
start
funny that
applying
you
that to
say
your
that
present.
because that like that literal so like what you're saying is literally what actually got us really kicked into gear with our ThinkAside is like we wrote down our goals. We wrote down, we built our house. You know
Right.
what I mean? We walked it. We're like, okay, like this is our end goal. This is the house that we want. And then we were standing and they're like, holy shit, how do we get this?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's start with the floors and the
All right,
walls
let's observe
and
it.
it's got 27 windows, so let's go grab those real quick.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, so we literally walked into our house that was built and then started pulling things from it that way we could recreate it,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah,
it's
so we could
like,
build it again. We could get to a point that we could build it ourselves and match our
like
future selves.
just my mind is like really like just
It's
like
tingling.
holy shit right now.
Yeah.
It's like mind fuckery at its finest.
Yep. And those are the
But
greatest conversations when
I really need a drink, so I will be right back. I'll need to start trying to bring water in when I do
supplement
these.
water, yeah.
Yeah,
It might just be the right amount to get you
you
used
know
to
what's
it.
funny though?
What?
Even when I liked drinking water, like when I was a teenager and a kid, I would not drink. I did not like any bottled water. I did
Yeah.
not like filtered water. When I drank water, like the school fountain water, fucking mint. The fucking my dad's well water, mint. My
I
dad would be like,
love
that
well
water's
water.
my dad's like, that water's disgusting because he lives in kind of a swampy area. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I'm sitting there like,
Yeah.
delicious.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why it's funny when I was actually over at your house. It was actually a thought of mine. I quickly dismissed it, but when well water was mentioned, I'm like, ooh, glass of water. Nah, where's your Mountain
Ah.
Dew? And then I went downstairs and grabbed the Mountain Dew.
I say, yeah, bro, you could come over and fill up a 64 ounce, friggin' fill up a gallon and bring it with you. Have that for a week.
You know,
Throw it in the
and
fridge.
honestly, I might take you up on that because I just really I've never had a bottled water that I like, and last time I tried to drink a bottled water, I took one sip, set it down, like nope,
Yeah, they
all
filter it.
good.
It's oftentimes like purified water you'll find is different than spring water. You have purified water, which tends to be, as far as I know, it's like city water that they just filter. And then you have spring
April
water,
drinks
which
Poland
is
Springs,
right, which I
whatever
believe
water
is
that is.
pulled from an actual spring that they filter at that point. So it's considered a little bit fresher. It has a different flavor to it.
Yeah,
But
April really likes it.
yep,
Just yeah. So
well
I
water.
might actually take you up on that. I might actually have to try your well water and
Yeah,
see what's
try it
up
out.
with it. You
It's
know.
it's very good well water. Like for someone that loves water, it's very good well water.
Yeah, because like I said, I don't know what it is, but bottled water just ain't for me.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really cool. I like the idea behind that with the past, present, future, and it's cool because it also will tie. We'll go into this more at some other point, of course, with death, but it ties into death really well as well because it's the idea of how like I don't want to die, but in a sense you're already dead and you've never been born, as I said earlier. And so then when someone else dies, we can kind of apply the same logic as like, because this is actually, it's not like I'm coming up with this. It's something I had heard. Is they do exist just as much so as they always have, and it's just they exist on a different plane that we can't see them, but they're there. Because if we lived outside time, like knowing that that's
Right.
theoretically possible, being the whole time and
Right.
space, and
Yeah,
yeah,
well if like so if we're using like our neighborhood mentality for like the whole position on time, right? Then like I said, like with houses already being built and being able to walk in, as you said, my death, like I'm already dead,
right,
but I'm just being born. You
yeah,
know what I mean? So
depending on the
it's one
house
of
you're
those
in.
things, right? So it depends. So it's like one of those things that like on the surface, if you just take it as face value, you're like, you're not making any sense. You should probably be medicated. But it's like, but it's like, I'm not saying that this is reality. I'm by no means trying to like,
Yeah,
whatever,
it's
you
all
know. But
theories, all reason.
I think it's a really interesting concept because with that being the concept, it makes life have far infinitely more possibilities, right? Like, for instance, I don't know if you know anything about the Mandela effect,
Yep.
but it's like little things like the Fruit of the Loom logo. You know what I mean? Like, I distinctly remember it with the
Bernstein or
basket.
Bernstein.
Right. So
Yep.
it's like, okay, so what if we really did operate on that plane, right? We operated on the time plane instead of a timeline, okay?
Yeah.
And on the time plane, these people, although it may have taken what we would think is a million years, we'll say, on the plane, right? They finally decided that this time through it was a little bit different.
Yeah.
And then so instead of it being Bernstein, the difference was changed on one plane over here, and thus it changed on all planes. And we remember it differently. We remember it as one thing because that was true. But in our new neighborhood, in our new plane, that point has been changed. You know?
Yeah. Well, and then it makes me think like it makes me wonder if past, present, future can battle one another. And what I mean by that is can they impact? So like in that neighborhood, being that everything exists, past, present, future, all exist in there, and the idea of it changing for everyone, I wonder if some of those houses got destroyed, right? If there's some sort of effect, something that happens, and they're kind of conflicting or whatever, and some of those houses get destroyed. So now the things that you remember You remember that house looking a certain way, but you can't necessarily go there to find out. And I remember it looking a different way because it's destroyed.
Right. Ah,
It's
what the
a,
fuck?
because like, yeah, technically you can look like with the
Well,
Bernstein, you can literally look at what it is, but even that's what it is now. What it could have been rebuilt or whatever.
right, and that's just it. So like if you were to take that idea and run with it, because like for instance, like one thing that I've noticed about our at least like up here and stuff is that everything's kind of losing its standout effect.
Okay,
Like McDonald's used to be like colorful and stood out, and
gotcha.
now it's black and gray. You know what I
Right,
mean?
I get you.
In general, people are going towards a more classic modern look, which is stainless steel, black on gray on just like a kind of plain look. You
Right.
know what I mean? I'm not saying I don't like it, but it seems like I'm seeing it more and more everywhere, right? So then like if you were to break that down a little bit more, like Fruit of the Loom, for instance, like the what I remember it having the basket and shit, it doesn't have that. That's more character than just Fruit of the Loom.
Yeah.
Bernstein versus Bernstein, you could argue one of them has more character than the other one. One is more
Yeah.
neutral, one's more
Right.
modern. You know what I mean? So it's just like if you were to actually break it down, there's a lot of things that could actually tie into this that's like super like, huh. Because if you have the
Yeah.
idea of like if I right, so if the idea is I can walk into this house because it's mine and I've already built it. But on the same hand, wouldn't it stand to argue that if you didn't like a house that was on the neighborhood, you could also theoretically walk into that house and change it? Or, like you said, completely tear it down and build it back up? Is that something you could do? Because we've already established we can go in there and pull from it for good, or what we would perceive as good, right? We
Yeah.
already know that we can go in there, pull for it for one way. So why wouldn't it stand to reason that if you figured out a way to pull for it one way, that you could go in there and in fact figure out how to push it another way?
Yeah, and then it makes like it brought my mind to Back to the Future. If you've ever seen that, they do a very good job at explaining the idea of going back in time and making a small change that ends up making the guy rich, things like that, and how like you're in a way saying that like the idea of walking into a completely new house or whatever, an old house, new house, old house, future house, whatever, and you're pulling from it, you're changing it so that way it's like you said, like tear it down and rebuild it. So if you were to go in the past and you were to say what you know to be true is that these people won, say the like in that case it was like an almanac, they were able to bet with the almanac that they had in the future of who won baseball games, and they bet against and bet for and whatever, and they just became a millionaire, billionaire, whatever because of that. And so it's in a sense they were like tearing down their own reality and creating a new one. And like so if you were to go back to the present, what if there were people that still remembered the reality the way that it was versus the reality that it is now? And that would be kind of the Mandela effect in a sense, I would imagine, is because
Yeah,
some of us might remember some things differently because we kind of have a lingering impact from that never happened reality that did happen. Or it's weird.
that's a super weird thought. This
And
is a really interesting. I really like the analogy going here. I really do. I really think it's gonna like, wow.
yeah.
Like I'm not saying like I believe it, but like I mean,
Well,
I feel like it's just as easy to believe as like time on a linear line.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing is like our personal actual belief on it doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? Like that's the cool thing about just kind of expounding upon it is like it's a possibility. And like you said, when you're aware of space and time and just how much there is to it, it kind of expounds the brain's idea of what's possible. And then you're able to look at all these many possibilities and you're not limited to only a few. Like I said earlier, like, and you said like it was mind blowing, and I said it tingles your mind. Like that's what I mean. Like it literally just like it feels like all your electrons and neurons and everything are firing at the top of your head, and it feels good because you're expounding your mind. You're literally expanding it because of, I say literally. I guess you're not literally. It's not growing in a physical
No,
sense, but
no, fuck that. My head is I'm Jimmy Neutron in this bitch now. Only reason why my head still fits in my hat is because it's a snapback.
yeah, fair. But yeah, so it's pretty cool. Like time, and then you had said too how what did you say about time travel and the idea of it? I don't remember. I don't remember what it was, but it just got me thinking about the whole time travel thing and like applying it to even just in a more real sense is like if we could travel or exist outside of time, that, like you said, like not only would that solve immortality, but it would also solve the perception of time, right? Because you're not in it, so you would ideally be able to go wherever you want. And so to exist outside of time, to me, not without sounding too much like a heretic or whatever, I would argue that's closer and closer to what we define as a god, right? It's that you're effectively achieving godhood by being able to exist outside of time and space and uh, being
Well,
because you're
I
immortal.
guess that I mean, I can see what you're saying, but on the same hand, like it all depends because a lot of people would argue that like gods can create something out of nothing. And just because that you can create out of like just because you live outside of time and space doesn't mean I'll be able to like open my hand and like now there's a little bonsai tree that I can set down.
and
You
you
know
could
what I mean?
and you could argue that there's another missing factor that we don't comprehend. Just to add like
Okay.
a realistic, like if God existed, there's probably a science behind it. And it sounds to me like existing outside of time and space is one of the first sciences, being able to, because that would solve immortality and more or less time travel, because you would have always been and always will be, and you would be anywhere at any given time because you know what I mean. And that, I mean, that's pretty much what God is. But like you said, there's other factors. There's
Doctor
creating
Who.
something out of nothing. Yeah, well, and that's his Doctor Who's timeline.
Yes.
It's like, no,
Yeah,
no,
it's a ball of squibbly, wibbly, wobbly, wibbly
no. Yeah, and I
stuff.
mean for real,
Yeah,
because all of it
I
really
would.
is just possibility.
And so like if and it's crazy to think because like if you were to live outside of space and time, it's like I say that like we don't have the ability to like spot a bonsai tree out of our hand, for instance, but like I live within space and time. If I was not bound by the rules and the physics and the laws of like nature and space and time, then it could stand to reason that once I'm outside of those premises, that I would be able to do anything.
Yeah, and it would almost be like you could bend the rules at the same time because you understand how they work. And so it'd be like you can't necessarily spawn a bonsai tree out of thin air, but what you can do is know where that bonsai tree is going to grow, shift where it's going to grow, and somehow void the idea that it needs, earth to grow. And now, next thing you know, it's growing in your hand because you've passed time differently, and
Right.
it just naturally is growing the way that it would. It's just now it's in your hand.
Such a weird conversation.
It is, but it yeah, and it's like
I
the
love
idea
it.
that there's science in anything, and like what we don't think is science, we probably think is magic. And oftentimes what we thought was magic, we've learned to accept it as science. Even if we don't understand how it works, we know there's a science behind it. Just as like
Right.
right. And so it's weird. Like
Yeah, it's one of those things that like as as a human, right? In general, I believe that everything has a scientific explanation.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's a cause and effect, right? Like in general, our planes are flying because they are traveling faster than they can fall. that is the cause and the effect, right? So it's
Right.
like I I have a hard time believing in like, oh well, it just happens. I have hard time in like taking leaps of faith a lot of times, because it's like,
Yeah.
and it's crazy for me because as human beings, like just thinking about our just tying it back to time, right? What the fuck is time if it's not faith in a system? You know what I mean? Like time is a man-made
Yeah.
construct.
Right.
There's not a
Name at
deer
least.
out here that's fucking like, oh, it's noon, gotta go hide underneath the tree, or it's 1 o'clock, time for my daily feeding. You know what
Right.
I
It's
mean?
all based on other factors that kind of allow you to decide what it is. Like
You know what I mean?
circadian
So
rhythm,
like,
yeah.
so time is a man-made construct. So just to adhere to time, you have to have a certain amount of faith in it, right?
Yeah, yeah, at least our definition of it at the least, because like,
Right.
obviously, like you said, like the sun is at a certain point, and so I'm hungry and I'm gonna go eat, or like the sun is down and so I'm tired and I'm gonna go sleep. Like there is weird like where individual perceptions of what we call as time, like if I'm sitting here and it feels like it's only been 30 minutes and you feel like it's been 45, like that's our perception of something that regardless of if we give it a name, it exists to some extent. And then like you said, like the construct is that like we've decided it's very specific to this.
Right.
It's
So like if we were to look at the time and it's like, oh, well, 37 minutes have passed. And we will both have faith that, yep, you were wrong and I was wrong. It was 37 minutes.
right.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's like the faith in that system. Because, like, for instance, during the winter when the days are shorter, the sun is gone up here at like 6 o'clock. Yeah,
Yep.
I have faith that it is still 6 p.m. as it was in the summertime when the sun was in the sky until 9 p.m.
And then you throw in things like daylight savings for some states and other states don't, and how that changes the literal time, but not the measurement of it.
And we just have like this faith that, yep, that's time and it's how it works. And it's like, if you, so like thinking about time today is really just like to like adhere to time and believe in time, which I believe everybody in my life I've ever met believes in time, right? That takes a level of faith that could, you know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
I've always said that I have, like, I started this off by saying, like, I have a hard time by a leap of faith. And it kind of hit me that, like, how can I say I have a hard time with faith when I have faith in time every single day? And that is the most man made construct there is. And I know that to be true. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't have any proof of time. I don't have any proof that 6 o'clock in December, when it's pitch black outside, is the same thing as 6 o'clock in June when the sun still looks like it's at high noon. You know
Right.
what I mean?
And the argument is that like it's kept track of, so it's like a way to keep track, so like you can kind of expect that it would be, and from a measurement standpoint it makes sense, but then you add all the other factors that we've talked about, is it's like there's multiple times going on. There's not just one time. It's like there's
Right.
your time, there's my time, there's everyone's time, and then
Well,
there's
and
the
then like
time
if you
that we
want to take it to a more
collectively.
literal sense, right now for me and you, it's 2:34. What time is it in Japan? I
Right.
promise you it's not 2:34 p.m.
Right. And so it's like it's the measurement, but it's the measurement of not one thing, it's the measurement of moments passing relatively to any given thing that we decide to measure,
Right.
which
No, that
is
yeah, yeah, that was the pretty much the Google definition. You know,
okay. Yeah.
that was one of them
Yeah,
in the
right.
downs.
Okay, so that makes sense to why I would. Yeah, so, and like you said with like faith, and not to bring it on that tangent, but like it's interesting how when we realize that, like even something like you said as like time, when we realize that that isn't necessarily what we believe it to be, it makes sense that if we believe that to be possible but that it isn't fact, then realizing that there's a lot of things that we think is fact that we we actually, it's just a possibility as well. It's just what we've decided. And that, of course, we can talk about fact another day, and that's a whole conversation within itself, as we've talked about. But it's really interesting to think that, and that just goes to show all of this ties in. Every episode we'll have ever, I think, is going to do a very good job at, we can pull at any point and be like, this is how it applies, because it does. Like, these are fundamentals. These
Well,
are
that's philosophy, right?
Yeah,
Is the way, your perception of life and how things tie together,
yeah, pretty
you
much
know?
the fundamentals of knowledge of any,
You
really,
know?
of any given thing. Yeah. So I would say from that, like, I mean, what I would take from that is like just being careful of what we think is fact and what we think of as possibilities, and realizing that there's a lot more to it than we know, right? Because like you said, like time, like something that we think is just very finite and measured, it isn't necessarily. It's
And
very
that's why I
relative.
think it's kind of like I really like this neighborhood analogy, and I think I'll probably use it in my like gaming streams to come,
It's a
because
good
I feel
analogy.
like it's a really good way to encapsule the idea of where you started doesn't define where you're going, right? So if you stop trying to look at it as a straight line and you stop trying to look at time as point A, point B, point, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
straight. And you start looking at it as more of a plane, you know what I mean? And you start like when you're looking at it as a plane and you can pick where to start, why would you start at the starting line? Why wouldn't you want to start at the finish line with all the winners?
All
Why wouldn't you
right.
want to be why wouldn't you want to be, you know what I mean? So for me, after like, especially after this conversation, it's just got me kind of looking at things differently, especially about time management, right? Because like when you look at time linearly, it restricts you in a lot of ways, you know? And if you try not to, I feel like you could almost achieve more in less time.
Yeah, and that, yeah, because you can be, if like you said, like if you use that time very carefully, if you use it really well, then if you're very productive, as you become more productive, then it's going to be the same amount of time that has passed, but you're going to achieve more in that time
Right.
because you're
It's
faster.
like uh it's like that. It's like a graphic designer, for instance, who starts off and it takes them a little while to make a picture, but by the end of it, you know what I mean, they can throw that together in like 5 minutes. They're still going
Yep.
to get paid the same amount,
Yep.
but they're probably even going to get paid more because they're better at doing it now, even though they can do it faster. Because it gets to a point where you no longer trade your time for money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's to me a whole, money, and that's a whole nother conversation. But like
Yeah.
because that's something I'd very much like to work towards, is not trading my time for money. I want my money to be accruing itself so I can spend my time where I want to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I want my money making money so my time doesn't have to.
Yeah. And well, and that's the, where you spend your time, right? Because like you can't get back time, in the sense that even
Right.
if you could go one way or the other, like you're still, to some point, like you exist, and because you exist, you can't get back how you existed before. Like it's
Like even if you
still,
were to go back to a point, even if you were going back to a point in your neighborhood, right? You still had to walk there. You still had to drive there. You still had to get there. And it's
yeah.
like that transition time, you can't get that back. You know what I mean?
And like it does make me wonder if maybe that's a whole nother theory that you could think out, is the idea of like, can you reverse yourself, or the time, like your internal clock itself, could you reverse that? Is there a way to pick and choose like where you want to be and whatever else? But that would take some.
Well, that's like so right now we've been going and we've been thinking about time externally, right? Like how we can
Right.
apply it externally, and if we were to like even live outside of time and space itself. So if you were to apply time internally, right, and you were to apply these same, so if instead of say building a neighborhood, right? So we'll say now for this analogy, I'll use a single house. There's no neighborhood. I am my house. Okay. So we're not moving because we are inside of me. So therefore we are inside this house, right? The
Yeah.
house is me. And if I am now inside my house and I am now looking like within myself, right? And I'm trying to think how to word this. Wouldn't it stand to reason, right? So now if I'm out, because to me, once again, like if to be outside of space and time would be like an external thing, but if we were to try to go internal, we would still be existing outside of space and time, but like in a different way.
Right, because we'd
You
be
know what I mean?
existing within ourselves, just not anywhere
Right.
else.
So like our so to me, like if you were to go like actually like try to be literal with it, like your
Yeah.
body would still be here, your house would still be here, but you are within yourself. Therefore, you would theoretically be aging differently than your body. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah, and that would make sense because like you would still be aware, you would still be conscious, and so like, you would still have thoughts and still be able to make conclusions as a result, and all that stuff.
So the idea is that if I was able to go within and remove myself again from space and time just within myself, so it'd be
Right.
like an
The internal
inverted
self.
role
Yeah.
of removing myself instead of external, then theoretically, if I wanted to, I should be able to start tearing down my house. I should be able to start bringing my house backwards from where it is. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you have like, so as an example, we'll say like, I have a stomach ulcer. Oh, well, that's a bad dresser in here. Let me throw out the dresser, replace my dresser. Stomach ulcer's gone. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and it sounds kind of like I can see how someone coming into this conversation would be like, "What are you talking about? That makes no sense." But like for real though, think about it. So like if you're able to do that, then that would explain how there's miracles, right? Like the idea of how someone was miraculously healed. In the Mormon church, they teach that you use the priesthood and you give them a blessing and you command that they get better. In other religions, it's differently. They might pray over, like multiple people might pray with the power of prayer, they heal them. Like there's a lot of different things, like probably not even just religion, but there's a science behind it if it happens. And so it would make sense that that would be a possibility at the least, is the idea of being able to go back in time in a sense, or in the future, and kind of rearrange some things so that way you're in a sense you're using the past stomach or those molecules
Right.
to get rid of that tumor, and then throwing the tumor somewhere else or whatever. I don't know where it would go, and that's another conversation, is if you replace the present with a piece of the past or the future, where does the present go? Does it go into the past future, or does it like cease to exist? What
Right.
happens with it, and what happens to you at that point? Like, can you, if you bring yourself into the past, um, do you replace your past self? And of course that opens up the paradoxes and things like that of like, does it create multiple realities, or does it split into one and cause problems? Or and you see that
Well,
in
and to me, it'd be like if it was like if you were trying to tie it into like multiple realities and stuff, that'd be super easy as far as would it just create a new neighborhood?
right.
How big is the plane? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? We never said how big it was. So like how far, how wide, how is it never ending? Because if it's never ending, then I'm seeing dimensions on dimensions on you know what I mean?
And yeah, exactly, like you said, dimensions, and that's an interesting thing, because then it's not only how infinite is that layer, it's how infinite are the layers. Because if you can have multiple layers, then like you said, dimensions, you can have this layer of what we perceive as time, and like in the sense of like having multiple, or like a line, or we might have the group of neighborhood that's all the houses from past, present, and future. But then we might have the next layer on top of that that can look down and see our neighborhood, but we can't necessarily see theirs, and theirs is slightly different, or maybe they're not houses, instead they're igloos or whatever. And so what we think is normal and perceive as truth is different than how they see it, but yet they can also see our truth. Just like we can see an ant's truth, right? Like we can see that their ant hill is this and this and this, but they don't know what our house is. They don't really know what that is, or the car. They don't know that we can speak, what our words mean, stuff like that. But we can see that they can't. We can observe them more than they can observe us, because the understanding and the
At least that's our truth.
right, right. And who knows? Maybe they, yeah. And that's an interesting thing as well, for sure. But yeah,
Like, well, because like, and it's crazy because if you break down time and what time is for, like, if you try to break it down a little bit further than just humans and like me and you, right? Like black flies, for instance, they live like what, 2 weeks
yeah, something
max?
like that. Yeah, very like
Like,
it's
I'm
days.
gonna Google it. Black fly life cycle. Yeah, that. Uh, 3 to 4 weeks is how long your average black fly lives, right?
That's crazy. So almost a month to a month.
Right. So like, and it's crazy to me if you think about that because like a month to us is nothing.
Yeah.
Like we live on the same planet, us and those black flies. I know people are gonna argue intelligence and what the ever, but like if you think about it, like we both exist on the same Earth, abiding by the same laws of nature. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, and so like their entire life is 3 to 4 weeks long. That is insane if you think about it. Like 3 or 4 weeks, like that's a blink of an eye for us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've how many months have I been alive for now? I'm fucking 26.
And it
You know what
makes
I
you
mean?
wonder how, like, if they could, like, say they could think, like, okay, so a month is a month, a day is a day, 30 days, 28 days, 31 days, make up a month. So that means I have this many days, this many hours to live, type thing. And how would they perceive a month at that point? Like, how much bigger of a time frame would that be? How much more would every second matter if they
Right.
were aware of that? And so that makes a lot of sense. Like if we thought we would only have, like, say we only had a year left, and we absolutely knew that with a surety we were only going to live for a year, and we were at our current consciousness, I think we would value that year much differently, and we would break up each moment to mean a lot more, and therefore probably be more productive in those moments.
I heard something that I think ties really well into what you're saying, okay? And he said it like this. It was like if you woke up with $86,400 in your bank account today and you were guaranteed, like without a shadow of a doubt, 100%, that you would get $86,400 in your bank account tomorrow and every day following for the rest of your life, would you just let the $86,000 sit there forever and accumulate? Or would you start spending it? Would you start using it? You have 86,400 seconds in a day. Spend them, use them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like that.
And it's like, once, like I said, because as I told you, I've been listening to a lot of inspirational, a lot of
Yeah.
fucking money people, a lot of, and it's like, once I started looking at it like that, right? Because like, yeah, if I had $86,000, 400, like the first thing I would do is, yeah, I don't care that I'm guaranteed more money tomorrow. I'm taking this money. I'm gonna try to figure out how my money's gonna make me more money. I'm gonna be investing. I'm gonna be doing something with my money, even if it's just blowing it frivolously. I will be
Yeah.
doing something with it. I promise. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And it's like, why time is more valuable and we waste it more frivolously.
Yeah. Or
And
like you
once you
said,
start,
not even spend it. Just watch
right,
it go.
just, and it's, oh man. So it's like, that's why when you started saying what you were saying, I thought that that would tie in really well because, you got 86,400 seconds in a day. Use that,
Yeah.
capitalize on it. You get them every day. You're not guaranteed tomorrow. So if you don't wake up tomorrow, you don't get them, but you got them today.
Yeah.
Spend them today while you got them and
Right.
make it to where those seconds, they won't be able to buy you seconds in the future as far as you won't be, it's not like that movie that you were talking about where we can, grab each other's hands and just trade time. It won't buy you time in that sense, but if you start spending that time today it might save you time in the long run. Just like buying solar panels today might save your electricity bill next month, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like you said, like not only spend them, but be careful how you spend them because like you said, like it could save you some in the future. And at the same time, if you do end up saying, like you said, like tomorrow's not guaranteed. If I died tomorrow, I would be less likely to regret how I spent my money if I spent it correctly, or time in this analogy. If I spent my time
Right.
correctly versus, saying like I say I had $1 million and I spent it all and now I'm bankrupt. I have no time or money, sorry, and now I'm upset that I spent my money the way that I did. It's the same thing with time, like you said, like seconds. You only have this many seconds. You said 8,400. Is that what you said, or 86,400 is what you said?
86,400.
And so like if that's all you have, and then you spend them wrong, and you wake up tomorrow morning and you're on your deathbed and you're like, shit, I spent
My
80,000
last
of them
day.
wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
And I did. I really, man, I really like where our conversations went today.
Me too.
I really do.
Yeah, we definitely had an interesting one. I liked the analogy that was created. That was a lot of fun building on it. Building on our building analogy. Cool. Yeah. Well, I'm Andrew Lebrecq, and I appreciate you guys listening.
And this is Bong Shot Billy, and together we make up ThinkAside.
Yeah, so go out and contemplate what we've talked about, time being much more than what we think it is, and think aside. Thank you.